Hi, it's Katrina. The world has been telling stories of Atlantis for thousands of years, an ancient city that was so advanced the gods got angry and punished them. The legendary city sank, taking all of its knowledge to the bottom of the sea. But what if Atlantis was just half of the story? What if it wasn't just a city that was swallowed by the sea? What if it was an entire continent? Lemuria. The legendary lost city of Atlantis was first mentioned by Greek philosopher Plato over 2,000 years ago. According to him, the founders of the city were demigods, half human and half god. They built a utopian civilization and evolved into a formidable maritime force. The home of the Atlanteans was allegedly made up of concentric islands that were separated by large moats. The islands were interconnected by a canal that extended to the heart of the civilization. Everyone knows about Atlantis, but have you ever heard of Lemuria, the continent that no longer exists? Probably if you've been watching this channel, but if not, I'll tell you about it anyway. The legends of Atlantis and Lemuria are similar in several ways. They both had advanced technology, were destroyed by a cataclysm, and have sparked numerous theories and interpretations. But these two civilizations are different in one major way. There is no evidence that Atlantis existed at all. Lemuria, on the other hand, well, that's another story. British zoologist Philip Sclater made a name for himself in the scientific community in 1858. He split the world up into 6 geographic regions according to the distribution of animal species. Those areas of the globe are still known today as the Nearctic, Palearctic, Neotropical, Indian, Ethiopian, and Australasian regions. But a mystery emerged as Sclater was creating his classifications. Lemur fossils. You know, the animal, the lemur. You might be wondering, what's so important about lemurs? Well, fossils of lemurs were dug up in India, Madagascar, Africa, and South America. These are land masses that aren't connected by land, but lemurs don't swim. Do you see the problem here? This puzzled Sclater. It really bothered him. He thought, how could lemurs be found all over the world? This question haunted him until he came up with a revolutionary idea. He invented the concept of Lemuria, a landmass that once connected these areas. For this idea to work, this continent would have been enormous, even bigger than Australia. The theory was a bit of a stretch, but if he could prove it, the mysteries he stumbled upon would all make sense. So he got to work. And in addition to the unexplained locations of lemurs, Sclater found baffling similarities between monkeys found in Africa and South America. He revealed his theory of Lemuria to the world in 1864, when he published an essay in a scientific journal. At the time, this concept of an ancient land bridge was popular among the academic research community. Scottish geologist Sir Charles Lyell already believed that continents were routinely sinking and rising above the ocean, but very gradually. So it's not really surprising that the idea of Lemuria caught on after the publication of Sclater's essay. This long-lost continent could have been the answer to several scientific mysteries. Some have taken it one step further by proposing that Lemuria could have served as the cradle of humanity itself. The Secret Doctrine. In 1888, a book was published that discusses the origins of humanity. It describes 7 distinct root races, each representing a different stage in the development of the human race. Right now, we're only in the 5th stage, so what comes next? 24 years after the theory of Lemuria was put forward by Philip Sclater, Helena Blavatsky published a book called The Secret Doctrine. She was a Russian-American theosophist and the co-founder of the Theosophical Society. But what's a theosophist? Well, theosophists are truth seekers. They study a combination of philosophy, religion, and science. Theosophists are believers in an ancient universal wisdom that transcends the boundaries of various major religions, uniting them together. Maybe you're a theosophist and you didn't even know it. According to The Secret Doctrine and other works written by Blavatsky's followers, the first root race didn't possess physical bodies. Instead, they were ethereal. You can imagine them as spirits or ghosts, unable to interact with the material world. The second root race was asexual and shapeless. In other words, they weren't making babies like we do today. To reproduce, they engaged in a curious process called budding, which is basically natural cloning. Think of how cells divide to create new cells, or how plants create buds to grow new flowers or branches. This was essentially what they did, with no horizontal tango taking place, if you know what I mean. The third root race flourished in the realms of Lemuria. They even coexisted with dinosaurs. But how could that be? Surely any race of beings would be no match for the mighty and bloodthirsty T-Rex. But somehow, these people lived alongside these ferocious beasts. According to Theosophist William Scott Elliott, the only possible explanation for this is that these people were giants. Maybe they even kept dinosaurs as pets, like the Flintstones. During this time in early Lemuria, our ancient human ancestors supposedly laid eggs. This is a strange concept to wrap your head around. Can you imagine instead of live births, women had eggs that held babies like chickens? It's strange and unnatural to think about, but this is what the Secret Doctrine proposes. But over millions of years, the people of Lemuria went through rapid evolution, and eventually they developed to have the reproductive system similar to what we have today. What do you think so far? Are you a theosophist or not quite? Blavatsky and her followers weren't the only ones to write about Lemuria and its mysterious people. A few years later, James Churchward, a British writer, inventor, and engineer, started writing about a sunken continent that he called Mu. When he initially began talking about Mu, it was thought to be the inspiration behind Plato's legend of Atlantis. However, Churchward never mentioned Atlantis. Instead, he connected the Lost Continent of Mew with Lemuria. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to M. Vaccaro and David Fowler for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Thank you so much! If you are new here, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Lost Continent of Mew. Many people who believe in the Lost Continent theory think that Lemuria and Mew are one and the same. These names can be used interchangeably. The work of James Churchward, who first mentioned the land of Mew, draws from translations of ancient Indian tablets. He even wrote a series of books based on these tablets that talk about Mew and its inhabitants called The Children of Mew. The tablets are said to mention an ancient civilization of 60 million people. But sadly, these people and their home of Mew were destroyed. According to Churchward and his peers, such as Augustus Le Plongeon, a British-American archaeologist, Mew once extended from Hawaii in the north to Easter Island in the east. They also believe that the continent was so large that it nearly touched Japan in the west. If you've ever heard of the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, and if you've been watching this channel, you definitely have, some believe that these ruins could be what remains of this lost civilization of Mew. And in Micronesia, Nan Madol has been proposed as the southern part of the continent. Nan Madol is an archaeological site that contains substantial structures made of large logs composed of volcanic rock. Nobody knows who built these structures, and it's unclear how the architects even did so. But supporters of the Mew continent argue that the society to which these builders belonged to was highly advanced. Instead of placing these volcanic logs by hand, maybe they developed machinery like we have today. In 2019, an airborne LiDAR survey of Nan Madol revealed a complex artificial irrigation system. This system would have provided the people of Mew with fresh water. These people even had a sewer system, which they developed years before the Greeks and other civilizations that we would consider advanced for their time. As I mentioned before, Easter Island was the eastern boundary of Mew. Now, take a look at Easter Island with me. It's a small island in the Pacific Ocean that's located in the middle of nowhere, and yet it was once home to over 12,000 people. So, how in the world did these people get to Easter Island? Did they swim across the ocean? Or maybe they used ships? Modern scholars will claim that they traveled thousands of miles by sea in canoes. But what if that's not actually the case? If you believe in the Lost Continent of Mew, well, they could have simply walked there. This continent could also explain the similarities between Greek and Polynesian languages. On Easter Island, the people worshipped a sun god that they called Ra'a. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because the Egyptians worshipped a god with a very similar name, Ra. who also happened to be a sun god. These commonalities of religion and language suggest that these cultures either interacted with one another or possibly evolved from the same source. Helena Blavatsky, Le Plongeon, and James Churchward all described Mew and Lemuria in different ways, but they all agreed on one thing. The continent was destroyed by a horrible cataclysm. So, what happened? And did any of the inhabitants of Mew or Lemuria survive the catastrophe? What happens every 7,000 years? Very soon, maybe in the next 1,000 years or less, a disaster just like the one that could have destroyed Lemuria will happen again. So maybe you should start thinking about building an ark. Just about everyone has heard the story of Adam and Eve. It's biblical, sealed for all time in the Holy Book, which will likely exist for the rest of time. But not many people have heard of the Adam and Eve story, a novel published by Chan Thomas in 1963. This book delves into several pre-biblical legends, as well as historic geological phenomena. Thomas does this in such a way to support his pseudo-scientific claim that the Earth is routinely hit by cataclysmic events about every 7,000 years. The first chapter of the Adam and Eve story describes a modern-day catastrophe. Thomas seems to paint a picture with his words. At first, it's just a rumbling beneath our feet, making little noise, but it soon grows to a thundering roar, erupting into a violent earthquake on a scale the world has never seen before, at least in recorded history. Thomas even gets specific. He says that the mountains in California will shake like ferns in a breeze, and that the Pacific Ocean will rear back and then form into a monstrous wave measuring 2 miles high. And of course, when a wave forms, it inevitably crashes. He describes the wind attacking like 1,000 armies, shredding and ripping everything in its path. And carried by the wind is that enormous wave, racing eastward across the entire globe. It first buries San Francisco and Los Angeles, as if the cities were nothing but mere grains of sand. Nothing, not even the most advanced technology we have, could stop this overwhelming onslaught of water and air. Not a single area on the continent is left untouched, and in many places, molten lava rises through the earth, spreading a sea of white-hot liquid fire, further adding to the devastation. Within just 3 hours, this formidable wall of water washes over North America. It buries the already wind-ravaged land under miles of boiling water coast to coast. In only a fraction of a day, all remnants of civilization on the continent are gone. Every state in America would be reduced to rubble, leaving almost nothing of themselves behind. For generations to come, these places would be nothing but mere legends, and only a few stones will remain where millions of people once walked. Picture that for a moment. You're going about your day and then suddenly the sun grows dim. You think it must have been covered by a cloud, but as you look up, you don't see clouds. Instead, you see a giant wall of water. That's probably when you would begin to panic. But there's nothing you can do unless you happen to be hiking on the top of a very tall mountain that day. Ancient civilizations went through many destructive events, including earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. One day everything was fine, and the next day entire cities were wiped away with rumors and stories brought back from sailors of towns that they had visited across the sea, and months later they were gone. Thomas doesn't stop in North America though. A wave as big as the one he describes would continue eastward, drowning Central America and South America before reaching Europe, where the barrage continues. Western Africa and the Sahara would vanish under nature's wrath. South Africa and Kenya would narrowly escape the floods, but they would still suffer severe earthquakes and winds. Asia and eastern Siberia will suffer a similar fate as North America. The Arctic basin will leave its polar home, shifting its location. And then comes the inescapable, paralyzing cold. No man, beast, or plant will be left unfrozen, as the entire Eastern Asian continent is submerged below sea level. But miraculously, people living east of the Ural Mountains in western Siberia will survive the devastating earthquakes and winds. Maybe you should start planning a move to Siberia? With their ice caps, Greenland and Antarctica will also shift and come to a stop in the torrid zone, where they will now rotate around the Earth. The furious winds and water will continue to ravage the globe for 6 days and nights, creating a new world in their wake. On day 6 of the cataclysm, the oceans will start to settle, and by the 7th day, the horrendous rampage will be over. Sounds pretty biblical, right? New islands will emerge as the old ones sink and disappear. Entire continents will be swallowed by the sea. The land masses that survive will wander and settle in new locations. This catastrophe, as described by Chan Thomas, is unavoidable. It's not a question of if it will happen, it's when it will happen. Almost all life on the planet will be wiped out. We'll join people of legend like Adam and Eve and Noah and his family. The people of the old world will be nothing but a myth, passed on by survivors of the cataclysm, just like Atlantis, and exactly like the inhabitants of Mew or Lemuria. Over thousands of years, our existence and the technological advancements we made will be forgotten. So what's to stop us from believing that something like this has already happened in the past? Maybe even multiple times. The last global cataclysm during Noah's time took place about 6,500 years ago, and if Chan Thomas is to be believed, one of these disasters happens every 7,000 years. That means we have less than 500 years to prepare. So, unless we want to end up like the people of Lemuria, we should start settling high up on the mountains. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The end of Lemuria. So, did one of these disasters take down the mighty continent of Lemuria? Well, I'll leave that up to you. William Scott Elliott and author James Bramwell describe the horrific events that destroyed Lemuria. According to them, this global cataclysm occurred about 11,500 years ago. Evidence to support this theory can apparently be found all over the world, from the pyramids of Giza to Easter Island and even across Africa. And of course, I'm referring to the Great Flood that's mentioned in the myths of pretty much every culture on the planet. This flood happened during a period of Earth's history known as the Younger Dryas. But maybe that name should be changed because it wasn't dry at all. As described in Chan Thomas's book, the ice sheets covering most of the northern hemisphere began to melt rapidly. Torrents of fresh water poured into the planet's oceans, causing sea levels to rise and continents to sink. Entire cultures that once populated ancient shorelines were shattered and brought to their knees. But like so many legends and stories of old, there were a few survivors. And these survivors picked up the pieces and restarted civilization. So, what caused the ice sheets to melt? Well, there's not really an answer to that question. At least not one that everyone can agree on. Some believe the flood could have been the result of a solar event that was so intense that Earth's magnetic field was stripped away by plasma from the sun. This would have exposed the planet to extreme radiation and heat, unlike anything we've ever experienced before. Others think that it could have been the impact of a massive meteor or asteroid, like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. Or it could have been a pole shift, which also would have resulted in a global disaster. However, there is one Lemurian legend that offers a different explanation. They didn't say that the flood was caused by a meteor or a solar event. What they said was that the flood was caused by people. Helena Blavatsky, on the other hand, claimed that Lemuria was destroyed by fire. She said that volcanic eruptions broke the continent apart, reducing the single landmass to several islands. But gradually, over time, those islands sank into the sea, taking with it all of Lemuria's history. It's no surprise that volcanoes can be extremely destructive. I mean, just think of what happened to Pompeii. But James Churchward described a different version of events, one that was more immediate and dramatic. According to him, Lemuria was obliterated in less than 24 hours. Earthquakes shook the continent, and volcanic eruptions released fire and ash into the atmosphere. And at the same time, massive tsunamis engulfed the entire landmass. This was a catastrophic event, changing everything in a single night. By the next morning, Lemuria was gone. Imagine going to sleep one night and being woken up by people screaming. You look outside, but everything is black, except for the dull light you can make out escaping from the peak of a nearby volcano. You only stare out the window for a few minutes before you start to hear the sound of rushing water. Where is that coming from, you wonder? But before you realize what's happening, a giant wave destroys your house, taking you along with it. This might have been what it was like for the people of Lemuria. Like I mentioned before, there was also speculation that the continent was obliterated by a pole shift. If this happened today, it would be a civilization-ending event. Volcanoes around the world would erupt simultaneously, and giant waves would flood everything in their path. Entire civilizations that have been around for centuries could be wiped out in a single afternoon. But like the legend of Lemuria suggests, maybe the cataclysm wasn't natural by any means. Maybe the catastrophe was intentional. This 10,000-year-old story has been passed down through generations, but it can also be found in a book known as the Chronicles of Akakor. The title of this novel sounds like it could be an offshoot of the Star Wars trilogy, describing events that took place far, far away. But that's not what's written in the book. The Chronicles of Akakor says that the lost continents of Atlantis and Lemuria sank due to a nuclear war. And if that doesn't pique your interest, let me do you one better. The book also suggests that this war was caused by aliens. Aliens that you've heard of many times before. The Anunnaki. The first nuclear war. For a quick recap, the Anunnaki are deities that were worshipped by the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, just like the Greek pantheon or the Egyptian gods. But some people think that the Anunnaki were real beings, an alien race that jump-started human civilization. Some even believe that they created humans through genetic manipulation in order to use them as slaves. They essentially created us to do their dirty work for them, like mining for gold. Now let's get back to the Chronicles of Akakor. The book tells the story of two advanced and hostile races. Both of them wanted global domination, which of course led to a war. And surprisingly, this isn't the only novel that mentions this nuclear battle between divine races. Another book called The Visitors by J.J. Benitez describes the alien abduction of a scientist named Daniel W. Fry. He was taken aboard a spacecraft on July 4th, 1959. Fry found himself in a place he didn't recognize, surrounded by people he didn't know. The people who had abducted Fry then told him a story. One of the most amazing stories ever told. They claimed to be the descendants of a race that had once inhabited the land of Mew. They said that before their continent was destroyed, there was another advanced civilization on the planet called Atlantis. American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce also supposedly received telepathic messages regarding the lost city of Atlantis. He was able to describe the culture and their technology in great detail, as if he'd been there and had seen it with his own eyes. Cayce said that Atlantis used what he called firestones, along with advanced mechanics to produce an efficient and powerful form of energy. They had domed power stations that concentrated the stone's rays using prisms. The energy produced this way propelled their crafts through induction. This would have been similar to how we use remote radio control today. Despite the fact that the rays emitted by the stone were invisible, they propelled vehicles across air, land, and sea. The stone's energy was also harnessed to promote rapid healing. Ancient Atlanteans would align the rays in such a way that the energy would regenerate human bodies. This power also fueled industries. So basically, these people were using crystals and light to do things that are typically only thought possible in science fiction. Cayce even predicted that the lost civilization of Atlantis would eventually be discovered. And he was right, depending on who you ask. There's Bimini Road in the Bahamas, Sardinia, Malta, somewhere in Morocco. The list goes on and on. Cayce made this prediction in 1939. Almost 30 years before the Bimini Road was found. You can say that this was just a coincidence, but what if Cayce really did speak with survivors of an ancient war? It would be a lot more spectacular of a story if he did, so let's go with that. Cayce said that Atlantis lived in peace for more than 200,000 years. That is, until the Anunnaki came along. According to him, the Anunnaki began to corrupt the leaders of Atlantis, whispering in their ears that Lemuria needed to be taken down. The corrupt individuals under the influence of these aliens became known as the Sons of Belial. Think of them sort of as the Illuminati. They were responsible for initiating war with Lemuria. The story goes that 25,000 years ago, Lemuria and Atlantis disagreed on how to rule the Earth. The Atlanteans wanted to have control over every civilization and continent on the planet, but the Lemurians wanted the civilizations to develop on their own, allowing them to create their own unique cultures without intervention from either power. What does this remind you of? If World War II comes to mind, I kind of agree. Hitler and the Nazis wanted to control the entire world. They went so far as to seek the systematic extermination of races and people that they deemed inferior to the Aryan race. But we all know how that ended. Maybe there is still a secret group of people that exist today that possess this knowledge of an ancient nuclear war. So when they caught wind of Hitler's plan, they stopped him dead in his tracks before things could escalate to global annihilation. Lemuria told Atlantis to leave them alone. They didn't want to be involved in their plot and wanted things to continue as they had been for thousands of years. But Atlantis didn't back down, even after Lemuria insisted. Eventually, Atlantis accepted that Lemuria wasn't going to agree to their plan, so they started a war. The story goes that the battle began in 10,468 BC, more than 12,000 years ago. Plato later wrote that Atlantis was destroyed in 9500 BC, nearly 1,000 years after the war started. Imagine two global powers hating each other so much they fought for a millennium. But that leaves us with a question. How exactly were these civilizations destroyed? We know that they were at war and that they both lasted a long time. So what was the final nail in the coffin? Well, although Lemuria was advanced, Atlantis held a technological edge over them. Lemuria had weapons, but Atlantis had machines that could level entire mountains. Atlantis supposedly had weapons of mass destruction that harnessed the power of the sun. They could create intense beams of energy, and they used these beams to topple civilizations, including Lemuria. The Atlanteans flooded continents and reduced kingdoms to rubble, and in the process, they ended the lives of over 60 million people. But like several myths of antiquity claim, there were some survivors from Lemuria. They supposedly fled and hid underground in Agartha. And if you don't know what Agartha is, you're in for a treat. The legend of Agartha stems from the Hollow Earth theory. Some people believe that at the center of our planet, there is a legendary city that holds unprecedented technology, beyond anything you can even imagine. It's said that these survivors of Lemuria took refuge in Agartha and recouped. Then they struck back at Atlantis. At this point, there was really only one last thing to do. They both had buttons they'd been wanting to press, as it was only to be used as a last resort. But Atlantis had gone too far. The surviving Lemurians didn't have a choice. Picture every nuke on the planet going off at the same time. It's hard to imagine because, well, if this happened, you'd be dead. You'd likely only see a bright flash of light, and then it would all be over. The result of this nuclear war had massive implications for Earth. The world was thrown into chaos, its very foundation shaken as the planet's axis changed and the poles shifted. All that remained of Atlantis after this cataclysm was a few structures made of solid stone, like the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge. The inhabitants of Atlantis didn't survive the conflict, and they kind of deserved it. I mean, after all, they started it. But around 10,000 Lemurians emerged from the rubble and smoke. They had won, and after 1,000 years of conflict, the Lemurians were victorious. But their home continent was gone, and so they were forced to restart their civilization. And this time, they did it in secret. Legend says that those survivors built their new kingdom inside of a mountain, one that's still standing today, Mount Shasta in California. And some even believe that this new kingdom is still thriving, shielded from the outside world. Telos. Mount Shasta has made a name for itself as one of the most mysterious places on the planet. People have reported seeing strange glowing orbs. Others have heard voices that seem to have no source. Some have even felt like they're being watched by an invisible entity. The mountain is also regarded as a vortex, a place where the veils separating dimensions are thin. Native American tribes like the Modoc, Shasta, and Wintu hold the mountain in high regard. They speak of its power and believe it's a location where the spirit world can be accessed. Mount Shasta also contains several geological mysteries. The mountain is made up of so many different types of rock that it doesn't even make sense. Its structure is complex and unexplainable. Plants grow here that don't grow anywhere else on the planet, almost as if they were placed on the mountain intentionally. But where did those plants come from? It's believed that survivors of the nuclear war between Atlantis and Lemuria traveled to North America after the smoke had cleared, and with them they brought animals, plants, and of course, technology. The survivors built a city underneath Mount Shasta. They named it Telos, the City of Light. But surely there's no evidence of this, right? Well, actually, there sort of is, although it's up to you if you want to believe it. Several eyewitnesses have described this place after stumbling upon it. They speak of a secret entrance into the mountain, and they say that when you reach this entrance, you can feel the energy emanating from inside. They claim to hear a strange humming noise, and that you can feel a vibration through your entire body. Once you actually reach Telos, you are lit up by this soft glow that's emitted from the walls of the city. These witnesses say that Telos is composed of 5 levels, carved into the rock of the mountain, each one made up of intricate chambers and corridors. There are expansive gardens on every level where the inhabitants grow food, some of which is unknown to the outside world. The people that live here dress in flowing white robes and are said to be 7 feet tall. Despite their large stature, they supposedly move gracefully and slowly when walking from place to place. These individuals are all that remain of Lemuria. In their new city, their crystal technology is integrated with nature, just as it was before the war. These people use crystals for various purposes. They have chambers that resonate with certain frequencies and are capable of healing physical bodies and even the soul. These Lemurians also use crystals that allow for telepathic communication all over the planet. Transportation here is done via large levitating platforms that float along magnetic tracks, and these platforms are guided by thought alone. One of these witnesses who supposedly found evidence of this underground civilization was British prospector J.C. Brown. In 1904, he claimed to have found a cave entrance that sloped down for 11 miles, eventually leading to a village of sorts. He said he found shields, weapons, gold, and here's the kicker, skeletons. Most of the skeletons were tall, over 6 feet in height, but the tallest among them measured 10 feet. 30 years later, he gathered together an exploration team to venture into the cave once again. 80 people arrived and met at the base of Mount Shasta at 1 p.m. on June 19th. But Brown never showed up. In fact, he vanished. He was never seen or heard from again. Could it be that something or someone didn't want Brown to reach the fabled city of Telos? Did someone not want him to reveal the secrets of Mount Shasta to the world? Did the Lemurians themselves play a part in his disappearance? Unfortunately, nobody knows the answer. While there is no physical evidence of Telos and the surviving Lemurians that we know of, it could be that this is by design. After all, why would they build a city within a mountain if they wish to be discovered?
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Alamut Castle. Alamut Castle is the very real home of the actual Assassin's Creed. To understand this great fortification high up in the mountains, we need to talk about the Nizari Ismaili. These people were followers of Nizarism mixed with Ismailism, and they went up in the mountains where they formed their own unique branch of Shia Islam. It became known as the Alamut State, founded around the year 1050 by Hassan-i-Sabah. He was also the creator of a unique military group called the Hashashin. The word actually translates roughly to smokers of hashish, and some scholars believe it's the original form of the word assassin. Get it? Hashashin, assassin? Kind of close. Whatever the case, these militants carried out missions involving espionage and assassination. They executed at least 3 major caliphs, 1 ruler of Jerusalem, multiple Muslim and Christian leaders, and who knows how many others. They had their home base at Alamut Castle. It was originally built by the ruler of Dalam in 865 AD, after he saw an eagle perched on a rock there during a hunting trip. He took it as a sign, and so commissioned the castle. Today, it's nothing but ruins in the snowy mountains of Iran, but still stands as one of the most isolated and mystical fortresses ever built. Sadly, the Mongolian invasion in the 13th century saw the collapse of the entire region. The Mongols reached Alamut Castle in 1256, and even the legendary assassins were forced to surrender. The gates to Anwin. In Welsh folklore, Anwin is the other world. The name itself translates to very deep place, and it by no means should be confused with the Christian version of hell. The world of Anwin is said to be a place of beauty and splendid nature, with its own castles and kings. More like heaven. The land is ruled by Iran, and it is a place of eternal youth, no illness, and no death, and with nothing but pleasure. Basically a paradise under the ground. The other world is mentioned in multiple mythological tales from medieval Wales. It can also be found mentioned in Irish myth. It's either an island or somewhere underground. While it almost certainly doesn't exist and is nothing but fantasy, there are places in Wales where one is said to be able to reach this mystical land. One of them is called Finon. It's a secluded waterfall in the valley of the River Sich that supposedly hides a secret entrance to Anun. Then there is Glaslyn, a beautiful lake in Snowdonia National Park where King Arthur supposedly threw Excalibur. Legend says that Arthur's body was put in a boat, let loose on the lake, and his body was carried off to this heaven. In modern times, there is a legend that says if 2 people spend the night on the shores of the lake, one of them will awake a great poet, and the other will go insane. We also have a place called Grassholm. This is a tiny, uninhabited island off the coast of Pembrokeshire. All the way into the 19th century, the local people believed it was home to fairies, and that they sometimes disappeared under the sea so that nobody could actually find them. The severed head of Bran the Blessed, the legendary giant and king of Britain, is supposedly kept here, as is a secret gateway to Anun. Okayama. Okayama in Japan is the birthplace of the great legend of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. In ancient times, the area of Okayama was called Kibi, and it's here that the legend has been passed down from generation to generation. It all has to do with a demon by the name of Ura, who resided in a great mountain castle on the very top of a craggy cliff. Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto was a local prince, and he waged war against the demon. The prince was ultimately victorious, and when he died, he was enshrined right next to where the head of the demon had been chopped off and buried. These days, it's said those who are brave enough can ask the head of the demon to tell them their fortune. Like many legendary places in Japan, all these locations are real. This city is real. Okayama has been standing for thousands of years. And there's the great Kibitsujinja Shrine, where the great hero is supposedly still at rest. There is even a special ritual that's done here, carried out at the shrine where the demon's head is buried, though it's extremely secretive. Visitors can't really participate, but if they are lucky, they can see the demon ritual from a distance. Would you be brave enough to ask the demon head to tell your fortune? Let me know in the comments below. Tir na Nog. Tir na Nog is the Irish version of the Welsh's Anun, but with a legend of great drama and excitement. There was a warrior by the name of Oisin, son of the legendary leader Finn MacCool. Finn was the leader of Fianna, who guarded the High King of Ireland. One day, while Oisin was out exploring the green hills of Ireland, he came upon a beautiful white horse being ridden by the most beautiful young woman he had ever seen. She had hair the color of the sun and wore a dress of pale blue studded with stars. She said her name was Neve and that her father was the ruler of a mystical land known only as Tir na Nog. She was there that day to take the great warrior Oisin back with her to the land of eternal youth. He agreed to go back and fell in love with the beautiful woman, but promised his people he would return to Ireland to see them again. On the back of her white horse, they galloped across the seas to the magical land. Together, the pair lived for 300 years in peace and happiness, but he eventually started to miss his family, and so Oisin took Neve's magical horse and returned to Ireland. When he touched the soil, he aged 300 years immediately. That was when he learned that his father and all of their people had died long ago, but the legend of Fianna and the land of Turnog still live on to this day. As for where this magical land may be located, nobody knows for sure. But Ireland has plenty of magical places. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Dermina420 and Tony Hubbard for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The Palace of King David. In the ancient Jewish text, King David was born a shepherd and grew to be a mighty king. He was the one who slayed the giant Philistine by the name of Goliath, raised an army, and ruled all of Israel. He is a mythical figure who may or may not have actually existed. One of the first things he did as king was capture the city of David in Jerusalem, fortify it against his enemies, and build himself a giant palace. And now, archaeologists believe they may have actually found that palace. According to archaeologists from Hebrew University, they discovered a large fortified complex near Jerusalem at a site named Khirbet Qeiyafa. It is now the best example of a fortified city from the days of King David, which means the king had more than likely used the site himself. The archaeologists discovered typical cultic objects that were used by the Judeans, who were the subjects of the great king. They also found no traces of pig remains, which makes sense seeing as pork was forbidden under Jewish law. Researchers are fairly certain that it was David who ruled from what is now a ruined palace, and his descendants after him. However, not everyone is convinced. Because the region has been the seat of many civilizations over time, the palace could have belonged to anyone. Archaeologist Israel Finkelstein says that the palace could have been built by the Philistines, the Canaanites, or anyone else since the 10th century BC. Hyperboria. The mysterious land of Hyperboria comes from Greek mythology. It's described in multiple tales as a land far to the north, way beyond the known world and extremely remote. The Greeks believed this place was so far north that it lay beyond the reach of the north wind. And according to them, there was a legendary race who lived in that land, people who worshipped the sun god Apollo. In reality, the legendary land of Hyperborea was most likely just anywhere north of the Black Sea. Archaeologists believe that because the Iron Age Celts living far to the north of Greece along the Danube did indeed trade with the Mediterranean, they were probably the inspiration for the Hyperborean people. The Greeks had no clue about just how frigid and cold and miserable the northern lands were, and so they turned them into a legendary place. When the Celts showed up to trade, to the Greeks they must have seemed like mysterious travelers from a faraway land. To them, the Celts were essentially aliens. Sierra de la Plata. In Inca legends, Sierra de la Plata is the Great Mountain of Silver. This legend spoke of a high and mighty city which was filled with an inconceivable quantity of silver. As you can imagine, Sierra de la Plata was of immense interest to the Spanish. After all, it was gold and silver that pushed the Spanish across the Americas, conquering all in sight. The Spanish defeated the Aztec and the Inca and gained more gold and silver than they knew what to do with. During their travels, the Spanish heard of fabled cities where the streets were lined with gold, and of the Great Mountain of Silver. Although the Spanish would eventually go on to discover the massive silver mines of Potosi in the year 1545, the Mountain of Silver eluded them. These silver mines were found near Bolivia, but the Mountain of Silver was supposedly somewhere hiding in the lush jungles of Brazil. The Potosi mines were also not owned by anyone when the Spanish showed up, while Sierra de la Plata was supposedly ruled over by a famous figure called the White King. We still don't know if Sierra de la Plata was a real place. It definitely could have been a powerful city hiding somewhere in the Amazon that the Spanish never found. Or it could have been a myth. There's just no way to know for sure, like with the Colombian legends of El Dorado. This city could even be there today, reduced to a ruin and all of the silver gone. The land of Hawaii. In the folklore of the Maori, the original inhabitants of New Zealand, they speak of a land called Hawaii. This should not in any way be confused with Hawaii, as it's not even close. The Maori people believed that before they reached their ultimate home of New Zealand around the year 1000, they came from a faraway mystical land called Hawaii. This is interesting because in reality, they most certainly came from a faraway land. We know that the Maori of New Zealand lived in China 15,000 years ago. The migration of the Polynesians is an incredible and fascinating story. People left China by boat, traveled to Taiwan, and over the next 15,000 years, slowly island hopped until they reached as far as Easter Island off the coast of Chile. Throughout those years, history and legend blended together. By the time these people migrated to the island of Fiji 3,500 years ago, they no longer knew where they had started. Their ancestors were thousands of years behind them, spread across different islands, already speaking other languages and worshipping different gods. And by the time they reached Samoa 2,500 years ago, their origins were even more murky, so it's no surprise that the Maori had made up a place called Hawaii as their mythical homeland. Tentagel Castle. Tentagel Castle, or rather the ground upon which the castle stands, has been occupied since the Romans took over Britain over 2,000 years ago. It really began to flourish as a community in the 5th century, but in the 12th century, Tentagel became legendary across the world as the place where King Arthur was supposedly conceived. The legends of Tentagel and King Arthur captivated Richard, Earl of Cornwall, so much that he built the castle here in the 1230s. And to this very day, the castle still stands. From between the years 450 and 650, Tentagel was a small but prosperous town right on the coast that traded with the Mediterranean. The headland of Tentagel was dotted with small and simplistic houses, the remains of which can still be found today. Since it was right on the water, it was easy for ships to dock, trade their goods, and be on their way. This meant people from far inland would come here to participate in trade. What happened after the 7th century is a bit of a mystery. There doesn't appear to be any records, and this city seems to have been completely abandoned. 500 years later, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote History of the Kings of Britain, in which he described the legendary ruler King Arthur. This text is the earliest mention of Tentagel and explains how Arthur was conceived in the city by Uther Pendragon, the king of Britain at the time, and his magical seduction of the beautiful Queen Igerna. We don't know how true this story is, nor if this part of Monmouth's supposed history is fantasy or fact. Either way, Tentagel is a mystical and very special place in Britain. Norumbega. Norumbega is an ancient mythical city in New England. Supposedly, this city was established by the Viking explorer Leif Erikson in the 11th century, near where Boston is today. Keep in mind that there is no archaeological evidence that this city ever existed. What we do have is a history of cartography. In the 16th century, just after Europeans discovered the Americas, maps began to appear with the name Norumbega on them. There are different spellings, but the city always seemed to be in New England. Then again, it wasn't always a city, but sometimes the name of a region, a river, or a landmark. This city was never found, if it ever existed at all. Historians think that if it did exist, it most likely stood where Bangor is now in Maine. Samuel de Champlain explored the region in 1605 looking for it, but found no trace of any civilization. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite mythical place? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and come back soon for more videos like these. See you later. Bye!